Hello and welcome to The Island. I'm your host, Ryan Willard, and this is the show that goes into the intimate and often private worlds and working processes behind leading creative professionals. In this episode, I speak with Thorsten Deckler, who is an architect based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Now, a little bit of background behind and about Thorsten. In 2004, he founded the architectural practice 2610 South Architects, together with Anne Graupner. And since 2020, he's been going solo and leading the practice on his own. The name, interestingly, actually, 2610 refers to the latitude of Johannesburg, which is, as we know, a very challenging and dynamic city, and as Thorsten describes, with deep structural fault lines. So for him and his practice, listening and observing have become very critical skills to finding answers inside of the complex problems that they encounter whilst making buildings. Their architecture is extremely pragmatic. You'll see some of this in this conversation, and is always still, it's got this delight and this element of surprise to how they have understood the brief and how they have solved it. And in this conversation, Thorsten and I really focus on drawing. So the beginning part of the conversation, Thorsten explains how he has developed a way of drawing by hand which rapidly develops and communicates options, ideas and insights and observations about the world and the projects that he's working on. Thorsten also describes how he uses drawing as a form of self-therapy, a way to document insights that are gained from movies, books, trips, which the result is this beautiful treasure chest of references that are regularly plowed back into his design process. And Thorsten, shows us this incredible array of these beautiful sketches and ideas in this conversation. Through storytelling lectures and workshops, Thorsten is helping people, not just architecture students, discover for themselves the power of thinking by hand. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Thorsten Deckler. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And you?
I'm very good, thank you. So, just as a little introduction, where are you?
And I'm sitting in a place called Brixton, which is not in England, it's in Johannesburg.
Got it.
In South Africa.
Fabulous. And you're an architect, you're a draftsperson, you're a thinker, you're a creative. And I wanted to use this conversation to talk to you about drawing, because you've got one of the most incredible sketching styles. I've just fallen in love with your drawings, your model making, your thinking. They're so sort of compelling. And I wanted, this series of conversations has been me discussing with artists about their processes and about their creative process. And I wanted to discuss with you about how you use drawing. And you go by the moniker The Thinking Hand on your Instagram handle, which is also the name that I called my business, my architecture practice. What is that? What is The Thinking Hand for you?
It was, I think maybe subconsciously, I know I had read the book by Palasma.
Yeah.
And then I had to give a talk at really short notice at university. And it was for a graduation, and it was specifically aimed at students. And so I just put together a talk titled The Thinking Hand, and the subtitle was How to Act Busy Without Smoking in Public Spaces. I was trying to stop smoking. There was a subconscious title, and it was really just sketches from a trip I did to Brazil and Argentina.
Right.
It started with, I really got into it with a 10-hour bus drive, which we thought would be great to take the bus from Buenos Aires to Cordoba, and it's like devastatingly boring. And so I just started drawing. And that's how really I started getting into drawing a couple of years ago.
Right. Okay. So has drawing always been part of your kind of architectural process or your architectural thinking?
Yeah, very much, because I was trained in the old school idiom, to become a draftsman, and But my mother is an artist, and yeah, she always encouraged me to draw. She was also an abstract artist, trained in sort of the classical sense, but an abstract artist, and she always loved whatever I did. So that was, sort of always got rewarded for making drawings.
And how do you use drawing in your daily practice? Is it a form of communication, or is it a form of thinking, or is it both?
It's pretty much everything to me. In practice, I very seldom use drafting programs, maybe Photoshop every now and again, but it's really where the ideas get generated. So, and if I have I have a team, we're about 6 people all together right now. So when we try and figure anything out, we make sure we have pen and paper right there. And we always speak and draw. So it's really like an embodied thing of communication. Yeah, even if I've met a lot of journalists, interestingly enough, early on in the practice, because they were very interested in how Johannesburg is transforming itself. So that always was accompanied with sketching stuff out for them. It became a method of explaining things.
It's interesting actually how many other disciplines can use drawing. Like, it's not, often there's a misconception about drawing being something that's completed, or it's a finished artifact to look at. And actually it's, again, like for me, the power of it is in the way that it shapes an idea, or that it can kind of be used in an iterative process.
So absolutely, and also I love what Glenn Murcutt says about design is discovering, and then if drawing is one tool of design, that's when you discover things. And so, I often just do a series of overlays. So my design process is always very exuberant because I just generate vast amounts of sketches and drawings, and often then go back to sift through them and edit them, and then I actually present that to clients. Like, it is very raw. It's like this is coming off the factory floor. They really appreciate it. And often they'll pick up little things in the process as well that they say, oh, we really like this. But it's amazing when you share that process how clients really come on board with the project and aren't as cut off, and they're not just presented with the final product, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, I think that's also really interesting is how drawing becomes conversational. How it becomes something where it is a way of inviting people into a process. And often it's easy for us to kind of hide drawings or keep the ugly ones hidden away. And actually, you never know what happens when you show somebody that it just generates another discussion or another set of ideas. How have you been retaining that kind of communication in your drawing whilst we've been working in kind of virtual environments over the last few months?
Yeah, it's my go-to tool to think. So that's what I do. I draw all the time. And the other day I was stuck on doing a fee proposal, and to visualize it, I just drew out all the panels and the model and the light in the model for myself, and then thought, let me just share it with the client. And that becomes very successful. I also use it to procrastinate. We call it draw-crastinate at the moment. In lockdown.
How have you been keeping that? How have you been maintaining that conversational kind of process of drawing whilst everyone's kind of remote working?
Well, that's like a page of my lockdown thing. So I took out a book on Joseph and Annie Albers. I really like them as sort of the Bauhaus artists who ended up at the Black Mountain College and really made a career out of craft and art. But at the same time, I was watching a Beastie Boys documentary, and wrote down a quote that from one of the tracks. So it says, "Pass me the scalpel, I'll cut off that part of your brain that does all the bitching." So this has also become therapy in a sense.
and, and a way of kind of collating your experience and ideas.
Yeah, so I do a lot of, and also like approaches to, the inner game, what you call the inner game. So I do a lot of mottos for myself. That's one from Beastie Boys again, because it's the most recent. And then I really, like, this is getting deep into procrastination. So that's a very therapeutic drawing, that one.
I love it. I love it. My name. It's interesting because I use sketching and drawing to think about business a lot. Like I'm constantly doing little images of like people design.
That's amazing. I love those.
People designing, or how like a marketing plan is going to work, or how we're going to be making notes, or even just talking about things like talking about money, or
nice.
but it's really it's such a sort of fascinating skill and way of thinking, and a way of communicating, and a way of laying things out very, very clearly, and just also capturing a bit of the kind of frenetic process of of what's happening when you're do you teach
So I'm not a permanent member of any school or faculty. So I dip into teaching every now and again. But what I have been doing quite regularly is workshops. So I've done some of those internationally also. Those were mainly focused on model building. But I've done a couple of workshops last year. I started just on drawing. And it really has its genesis in the slides I sent you also. So it's really just telling a story through drawing. And then I end up taking the students, they're usually first or second years, and my philosophy is kind of everybody can draw, but it sort of depends on recognizing the idea that you discover as you draw. And it's quite, I think for them, it's quite unnerving in the sense that it's so simple. So we'll just walk out of the building and go somewhere outside, and I'll give them a few themes, and they'll start drawing, and then really just encourage each person on their individual observation. Ask them a question, so why did you draw this? They'll say nature, or the animals sitting on the building, the doves, and then we start spinning a whole story about nature and architecture, or if it's thresholds or light or color. And then I sort of ask them to pursue that thought through the drawing more. And then you get some quite interesting outcomes. So someone would maybe only do a bunch of lines, and those would be the movement of people across the space, for instance, or only draw shadows, or only textures.
What sorts of obstacles do you find people have when they begin to learn to draw? Particularly like
there's always this thing that you don't know. You think you don't know, so it's perhaps like learning a new language. And then it's very important to simply encourage people. And there's like a couple of, like 5 tips you can give someone to draw. Right? To look more at the thing you're drawing than what you think it looks like. Then if you draw shapes, you think of everything in terms of rectangles. If you draw bodies, you can think of it all as sausages. And then if you want to do perspectives, you can kind of measure them with your pen and translate that onto your page. And and then just about taking care when you hatch something. And then a big one is what I call the Natalie Approach, which was a student in my first year class who would always get like the best mark in class, because she would always do one tiny aspect of a project perfectly, and the rest is kind of implied. And I said, you don't need to fill your page, you just do this little piece really well. Think about that piece. And students love that.
And how do you make the distinction between sort of, what's the difference between observational drawing and architectural drawing and sketching, and where do those sort of three disciplines meet?
Yeah, I think for me, it's all that flows into each other, but I think the clearest, let's say, architectural idea is a diagram, as a drawing. And I really learned that when I was working at OMA, because the top designers didn't touch the computer. They just had like a thin and a fat pen and a Mayline ruler and lots of tracing paper, and they were just churning out ideas and then giving them a name.
Yeah.
So that was really remarkable for me to see. And then the observational thing, I think it's important because you train yourself to see things. And I think one of the values we have in the practice is to recognize the extraordinary. And that is a really fun kind of motto to go through life by, because you then become very curious. In whatever situation you are, you will go and look for that thing you can draw, what's interesting here. I was stuck for 26 hours on aeroplanes and airports getting to LA, and I just filled the whole sketchbook just with that trip, with drawing people, drawing Dubai airport, just looking at the light and shadows. And so I was entertaining myself. And then I noticed everybody was on their phones, which brings me to, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but it brings me to that book cover I showed you, The Shallows.
Yeah.
Which is quite a scary prognosis for us as humans, and how we're constantly distracted without being kind of productively engaged in forming our own thoughts and ideas. And it's like he names it like it's what seems like a feast is actually a famine,
right?
Because he's so overwhelmed with information, and that you don't know what to value anymore. And so for actually actively, going somewhere and going, I'm going to figure this out and draw this thing, is this so much fun and satisfying.
And it's the discovery in itself. It's a complete sort of, you are literally learning to see something in a different way.
Yeah.
But I'd be really keen to see some of your images. Would we be able to do that?
Yeah, we can share. Can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so what should we look at? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because you were saying in the beginning that there's something that is compelling about the drawings I do. I was very keen to know in your mind what that particular thing was, because it's such a diverse range.
It's the personality of the lines. So I'm always interested in, like, or for things that I visually find interesting or kind of like I want to see more of, is the personality of the line. So like your line is almost like a signature. It's very distinctive. It's not like a kind of, there's, it's a nice, confident, flowing line that has its own character to it. And all the drawings have got this kind of personality to them that makes them very of you. There's something about you, and also that the way that the things that you've chosen to look at, and there's just a kind of nice curiosity about them. They're almost like they're very narrative drawings, like an illustrator for a children's book or something. There's something really kind of playful, curious about them. There's this sense of wonder. They're always drawing you in. They're not like you said, they're kind of these moments of the extraordinary, which you typically just walk past in a day. And there's this kind of very nice, playful, simple line work that makes them very legible. They're not complex. They're not pretentious drawings. They're not like overly refined. There's something really simple about just using one pen, by the looks of it, in most of the drawings.
Yeah, mostly one. Yeah.
and it's there's a kind of just this playful movement to everything, so everything kind of becomes alive.
Yeah, so I think what would be interesting is to look at one of the most popular ones, I think, that is on the Instagram page, I'm not sure, but was this one where it actually showed, it had a little tiny diagram in there which actually explained the idea
I love it.
why I even did the drawing. With a little 7-meter cantilever, which is quite remarkable. If you ask an engineer to cantilever something 7 meters, they just freak out,
Oh, wonderful! Really gorgeous.
This was really this was quite it was not a nice time when I made these drawings of the trees, because my son got very sick on holiday. He was only a year old. We figured out he had measles, but he was really, really miserable. And we'd had this holiday that we've been dreaming about for a long time. And then it was also rainy. And so these trees were directly outside the cottage that we stayed in on the coast, the south coast or eastern Cape of South Africa, which is very lush and verdant, and it is really great trees. And I would have never actually bothered to look at the trees if I didn't start drawing them. And then I started, adding, exaggerating here and there the sort of grotesqueness of where the limbs were cut off. And, some of them have nostrils and other
orifices.
I don't know what the plural of orifice is.
Orify.
Orify, yeah.
No, wonderful.
And then sometimes, so these I spent quite a while doing, and I hatched all of them on site. But others I would like this. I'm really into trees because I find it very hard to draw humans. But this was just taking a walk over this little hill towards Salzburg in Austria. And there was this beautiful forest, this incredible light of the tree trunks sort of crisscrossing this path through. And it was really quite like a movie. And I really didn't have time to make this drawing. So when I got back home, I just hatched it.
Can you just give us an idea of how long this drawing took to do?
So this one, maybe like the base drawing would take about 5 minutes, and then the hatching would take maybe 10 or 15 minutes on it. But this one, for instance, this would take at least half an hour, or at least half an hour to do this, or even 45 minutes.
Brilliant. I think that's one of the interesting things as well, is the speed of which things are done. It's kind of like that kind of just capturing an impression of something. And sometimes when you do things that fast or that quickly, like you really do just let your body take over.
Yeah, that's really great. But as soon as I'm asked, often, I've been asked recently to do commissioned drawings, and I just completely freeze up. So that's something I'm busy working through. But actually today I sold my first sketch online.
Brilliant.
To someone in Germany who grew up in Johannesburg. So she picked a drawing of Instagram, and I scanned it and emailed it to her.
Wonderful.
But yeah, so what is so cool about just drawing is that you start noticing things like this, grass. There's grass everywhere in Africa, this type of, so many different species, but all of a sudden, look at that, it's so elegant. You could create almost, wallpapers out of it, or even buildings or tools or something. It's just so compelling. And it has a kind of structural integrity and elegance that comes with it, that I really like.
Is drawing, how visceral is drawing for you?
Yeah, very. I have a sort of quite a German background, so it's very logical. So drawing is really a release for me from that tyranny of logic. But it also always has, as I do it, I discover why I do it. So there's logic kicks in again, which is deeply satisfying.
I love that. That, you know, I remember when I was, I think I was doing life drawing classes or something like that. And, you know, one of the exercises they often do is have you not look at your paper at all. And, you know, you're allowed to make whatever kind of marks you want, but you start making this connection between looking and something physically being felt. And like drawing can be quite an embodied feeling almost, that we don't realize that we're doing this subconsciously, but when we're looking at stuff, there's a physical sensation happening. And that's what I love about your drawings, is there's something really physical about them. Like you can, you know, you get the feeling across in the pen by the movement.
Yeah, I chose to zoom in on this one now because there's these tiny little hairs on the stem of the plant. And this plant literally just grew over this path I was walking on, and it just looked so gothic. It had these creased leaves, and you know, we all think we know what a leaf looks like, but each and every leaf is completely different because you look at it differently, and it also has a different shape, and they contort in different ways. And there's also quite a fun story behind this drawing because it's become such a popular birthday card especially for students who work in the office, because it's titled Strange Plant, and they kind of enjoy when they receive this birthday card.
There's a lovely, like, all your drawings are alive. They've got this kind of dance-like quality to them.
Oh, thank you.
Which is really joyful.
And then, yeah, some other stuff. So what I also like to do, so I'm really a big fan of Rudowski, you know, Architecture Without Architects. I'm a really big fan of indigenous vernacular architecture. My granddad was this farmer who could practically make and build anything. And I kind of like the logic, intuitive logic that comes with something that isn't overthought or is kind of evolved out of a direct need. And so what I loved, one of my clients' friends gave me this book actually by Rudowski. I didn't even know it existed, but there's such a crazy example here. It comes from Prodigious Builders, and this is where grannies sit in their living rooms to look out into the streets, probably so they can maintain kind of raw material for gossip, I'm imagining, a little bit ungenerously. But it's interesting how there might be a synergy between the safety of a town and the grannies, and then that somebody actually built the houses like this, so they scooped out the plaster or the walls into these shapes so the grannies could peer, you know, so the reveal of the window gets thinner and the grannies can actually diagonally look out.
Wonderful.
It's like a marvelous thing.
Where was the original building? This is in Spain.
This is somewhere in Spain. Yeah, it's in Spain. I wonder where my book is lying around here.
Oh, wonderful.
But then what's also quite fun is to add the plan and the grannies and leave out the burglar proofing because it's just too much effort to draw.
Yeah.
So you can make Rudowski's idea, sort of spin it further into a really entertaining story just for yourself, you know.
And so are they usually bars across the window? Is that what you're saying, the burglar proofing?
Yeah, so in the plan you can see it. So it's so dense that if you start looking diagonally, which is probably a preferred position for the granny, so she's not directly point blank facing traffic, but can see people coming and going. And if you look at burglar bars like at a acute angle, then they become solid.
Yeah. Oh,
So
wonderful.
I just like quite the crude way this problem was resolved, you know? It's like, that's fine, we'll just, you know, carve out this view slot for you.
Is an idea like this, is this something that will find its way into one of your proposals or one of your projects in a way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love this sort of quite opportunistic, and I would say even sometimes a little bit lazy way of looking at things. So you go, oh, well, you're quite accepting of the conditions. So you say, well, we can't change that. Okay, so what can we control here? We can't take the burglar proofing away, but we can take some wall away. This is pretty easy to do. Burglar proofing, you need to be safe. And the wall you can vary here and there. So we used it often in the way we design. Trying to think of an example, we did a whole building that is made of bricks or interspersed bricks that we ended up calling under the tree bricks, because that's what the supplier called them, because he thought nobody wanted them. And they were all the special shapes, like end of ranges for, you know, commissioned ranges, let's say for a mosque or a special building.
Yeah.
I mean, they feel like they can't sell them, and we could, like my partner at the time, Anne, she was so astute, and she just asked, like, how much do they cost? And she said, well, we give them for you, this is the cheapest brick you can find in South Africa. It's like, some of them just look like chocolate, they're so perfect. And they might have a shape, a chamfer or a bullnose. And so then we made quite an ordinary building, but then interspersed the bricks into this building in a kind of tapestry. If I can quickly show it to you.
Yeah, please.
I think that this comes with and I can't even claim that I did this, but I totally appreciate it. It was done by my business partner. But I think where the idea came from was, so we were told by the client to do this really quite dead simple building because the budget was super tight. So the shapes were just rectangular, nothing fancy. And then I thought to myself, well, what if we and the mandate was it's going to be face brick because maintenance, right? University doesn't want to pay for maintenance, and obviously so. But what gets built these days as student housing in face brick in Johannesburg is absolutely dreadful. And also the bricks are expensive. So when Anne discovered these under the tree bricks, which are here, they already just look beautiful. Then we could weave them into a kind of cloak that we could clad this very simple building in.
Can you show us those bricks?
Yeah, so here's just quickly, that's the building. So we added these 4 little blocks, this gut filler, then a big one, and then the client was actually so happy with the project that we added a second phase. And the idea here was to weave the special bricks, which we could get cheaper, into this normal brick. And those are the special bricks. So you can see these have a little chamfer.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of the tapestry of sorts, or a cloak, or woven, that kind of woven image that results. In retrospect, I discovered a building done by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, who, by the way, is from Joburg, Denise. And they did a very similar thing, actually, in the 80s. And it's got a marvelous building. And then even on the back, you know, the service. This is really the south elevation with the service ducts covered in sort of a brick lace work. And I only figured this out later because that's when my team told me. But here and there are, you encounter kind of a random brick, outside the lift, like there. I was like, what's this about? And they were like, dude, don't you know you're on the first floor?
Brilliant. And what?
So,
Is there like 2 bricks on the second floor?
yeah, exactly. So I've taken so many developers through this building, and when we start the tour, they're always like, oh, what did you do with your services arrangement? How big are your bedrooms? So I ended up just typing up this fact sheet and giving it to them. So like I said, well, you can just read the fact sheet, because I'm not here to speak about those facts only.
Yeah.
And then eventually they come around to loving the building, and one guy actually said, Thorsten, you took the utilitarian nature of it and made that the decoration that's completely integrated. Yeah, so it was quite a nice compliment from sort of outside architectural fraternity, who often critique architects for being so, self-referential often.
Yeah.
And really, with the fees must fall movement, I don't know if you're aware of that in South Africa.
No.
And the debates around decolonization. You really feel for students who have to basically come and study on a campus that was designed in a regime that rejected them only 3 decades ago, less than 3 decades ago.
Mm.
And what is the new institutional identity you can create
for
a South African university facing these challenges? And so we thought the woven cloth that represents kind of diversity but unity at the same time was sort of appropriate. And and students, we interviewed a couple of students after the first phase was done, and they were like really happy with how the building looked. They were really surprised that this was for them,
Amazing.
And that level of generosity, I think, is something that often goes out the window, or we misplace the generosity, or what we think should be generous in a building. I don't know.
Do you find, how do you make the connection with, say, a project like this, and say some of the sketches that you've done of it, or the drawings, or the investigations that you've been doing by hand? How do those sketches like inform those qualities, like that quality of generosity, or the quality of tapestry?
Actually, this was quite a breakthrough sketch over here, and this really really exemplified the idea. So we had to add a new wing onto the back of the hospital, state-run hospital, which is really, Tarkovsky would have loved it. It would have been perfect for Stalker or some depressing movie. And on the right-hand side, that was an existing building, quite handsomely detailed by a very good architect, Gordon Leith. And then to the left of that is what we built. So we literally just copied the one wing and then added this middle bit, which we then thought we'll make that special. Only that, because that's the entrance, that's where the kids arrive with their moms, because the mother and child hospital. And so this drawing helped to cement that idea. And if you look at the bottom here, you can see the little copy and paste symbol with the diamond in the middle. And so that really, really actually gets us all going. When you express that idea so clearly, and we had our anxieties of, what are we doing? We're just copying an existing building. That's not what architects do. We always reinvent everything. And the idea of having to come up with a contemporary version of that brick building was just so exhausting that we discarded it.
Yeah.
And so this is the client, actually, who's just the most marvelous guy, Professor Guvadia. He's a sort of, leading global health activist. And despite the context of the hospital being so off-putting, when you walk into his department or his section, his wards, like everybody is happy and smiling. And so we thought the building should have this similar welcoming aspect to it. So, and we had this we worked with this great artist who's also an architect, and developed this facade again out of standard materials. And so again, I was more at the front end going, I'm not redesigning a same size office block. I'm not doing that. I'm going to copy it. Yeah. Let's make the middle thing special. Let's give it some roundness so it sits snugly in there. And let's put tiles instead of bricks. And then Anna then took it over and developed this incredible artwork together with Lorenzo Nasimbeni. And the yellow tiles are actually some of the most expensive tiles you'll find in Johannesburg, but they're simply interspersed with bathroom tiles.
This is all for the external envelope, or on the.
So you can see over here, and it's also west facing, so every now and again it kind of catches rays of sunlight. And yeah, there was just bringing the whole idea to a conclusion, you know, like really hardcore, single-minded. And then Anna and Lorenzo just decided to not cut a single tile. So the whole thing is laid out. It was full tiles, no cutting needed. You know, in order to make it achievable. And so it's really quite special.
It's really interesting. Yeah. It's really interesting seeing the kind of finished products or the finished buildings, and then looking at some of your observational sketches, and there's the same kind of curious playfulness that's in the buildings, that you can actually, there's that same quality.
Yeah, no, that's really nice to hear that is translatable. And yeah,
do you think that there's buildings that don't have any kind of hand drawing that goes on underneath them can suffer as a result, or that they can kind of lose a little bit of that curiosity?
I don't know. I wouldn't venture, because I haven't really explored this in any scientific way, but I wouldn't venture that far. I would just say perhaps what drawing enables us to do is to distill the essence out of something. And in the process, you don't have to always be that accurate. You can also lie to yourself a little bit of self-make-believe, and you can coerce yourself into going for an idea. And then I think CAD and Revit are just such precise systems. They're really engineering systems, and I think they're on some level just too precise. And you start fretting about things that are perhaps not that necessary to fret about.
Yeah.
So, I love those tools. They really have very powerful advantages for us as architects. But I think we do need to always go between the two mediums. And although we built that student res in Revit, we had the entire project in Revit, we still made all those models that were on my table yesterday. Just for ourselves, not for the client, just to see what we're actually doing, and possibly also to give ourselves the confidence of what we're doing is right.
Yeah.
Not waiting for it to emerge on the building site, and also not having the energy, resources, or interest in creating like hyper-realistic renders.
Is that something you guys engage with, producing those kinds of hyper-realistic renders at any point? Are those
never? We never do renders, and it's not something I don't want to do. I'd love to. I have never had the need, and also, it's always a added-on service that we provide, and clients often just don't go for it.
Yeah. It's interesting as well how, with virtual reality and the kind of, I have to look at renders these days 2 or 3 times and then realize, it's not real.
It's so incredible.
And that there's something about I don't know, there leaves nothing to surprise almost.
I think this is the closest we got to doing anything realistic. It's kind of an office interior for a client, a medical NGO. So,
Do you find when you're dealing with clients, then you said that your clients often they don't request the renders, they don't request these kind of 3D buildings, and they're actually communicating with them by hand, even quite on a, do you still communicate by hand sketches when you're doing when you're in the kind of latter stages of a project, when it's kind of quite developed?
it all depends on the project. Let me just open something else here. We prefer to just do it as models. So we tell clients that you can have a model which we will loan to you, unless you buy it from us. We'll loan it to you. You can take it home. You can show it to your team, to your wife, to your husband, to your kids. And what we prefer about the models is that you choose how to look at it. You can adjust your eye level. You're not presented with this one dictatorial, perfectly crafted view or curated fly-through that leaves you no choice as a client who in the end has to inhabit and make use of that building, which might rather excite you and get your imagination going. What's that? And to take the roof off and put a little man inside.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we do models as pure seduction. Like this one was just meant to seduce a bunch of artists who couldn't agree on anything. To upgrade or renovate the studio. This is a really leading studio. What do you call them? Yeah, studios for artists in downtown Joburg. But the building just leaks. It's been leaking for years and years, and we came up with this idea of just fixing the most leaky roof first, and to just really adding a new roof. But in that, it's like adding an attic. And then we made this model. This is really stuff I learned while I was working at OMA. I just said, I'm from Africa, I can't draw on computers, never touched them, never seen them, but I can make stuff. So I got into the model room, and that was great because I could interact with, everybody. Rem would come in regularly, Cecil Ballman would drop in, and Petra Blaise would go, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I would be explaining projects to them. As this, it's like little pipsqueak from South Africa. And I kind of learned how to work with resin and perspex and how you can really machine that into quite a refined product. And this was an idea, it was a really small model, but as a jewel that really, it's like a diagram as a model that exemplified the process and got people excited about renovating their building. And I was, and this sketch I probably did like 20 times for the report, and in the end I just used the first one I did when I was discussing the project, because I got so uptight about making this, better sketch that I just became completely constrained.
This is an interesting aspect of architecture that I think a lot of people don't often get to see, is and you kind of mentioned it at the beginning about this, the diagram of buildings, but they're often, the way that we think about buildings, or the way that we end up using sketching is to really try and simplify a very complex system, just to sort of show how it works. And these can be really critical points in a project's evolution, because you kind of always refer back to, this is the diagram, this is this is how it works, if you like.
That's actually a great suggestion, a great thing you're saying. Unfortunately, I can't open this drawing much bigger, but this one down in the corner was really how we won this really big tender. And I just did 3 line diagrams of what can happen in the settlement, which is a settlement of 200,000 inhabitants. And nobody submitted any visuals in their tender. Nothing as simple as this. I don't think that's the only reason we won it, but it did. Yep. We went to the site. I took a tour. Spoke to people.
Can you give us an indication of how long it takes to produce a very simple diagram?
This thing, oh my goodness, that's 10 minutes. Yeah, this is really quick. And that was again just done for myself to, I was so overwhelmed by this mess. It's a post-apartheid settlement where poor people were just dumped on the periphery of the city, and you actually tendering for, a rather large appointment over 3 years for 100. You've got to spend 100 million rand, which is nothing in pounds, but at the time it was more. And it's just, there's basically shit flowing down the street. And you just go, oh my God, where am I starting? And then once I did the diagram, I noticed, well, the main road doesn't actually continue. It just peters out into, sort of a dirt track. And so that was one of our main proposals, is to close that internal circulation loop. And I think that gave the clients confidence. And I think drawings are sometimes also quite political.
In what sense?
Like this one. This is actually mapping 7.2 kilometers of daylight sewage in that settlement.
Wow.
And this is done digitally off a Google Earth map. But this road here, this long one, we were asked to upgrade that road. But when we asked ourselves the question, well, why does it need to be upgraded? It's because you've got a lot of, looked like grey fluid flowing down it and eroding it. And there was raw sewage, which acts as a kind of acid on the tarmac and very quickly deteriorates the road surface. That's what I've been told by the civil engineer. And so we took it right back and said to the client, well, you've got to fix about a fifth of the settlement. You've got to fix the sanitation, not the road. But the only way we could make that argument was then through actually having the drawing and putting it like up enormously in the boardroom. And it sort of shocked them. Should we go back to some sketches?
Yeah, please. Brilliant. That really starts to kind of see a total process of this intense sort of sketching ideas and how they can end up manifesting in actual built projects.
This one's quite fun. There was I was asked as a graduate of the school that I studied at to do a contribution to some celebration of their building, I think, which turned 50 years old. Sort of quite a nice modernist building. And so I really didn't want to put my work up because it seemed like too much effort to, sort out good photography and drawings and everything. And this was, like 10 years ago. I didn't have that much resolved work. So I just kind of located the school within, like, there it is, the little temple, because that's what the main building looks like. And just located the school within all the other stuff that the school helped me actually interact with my environment and process it as an architect. Because the school was really a political conscientizing.
Right.
I studied right at the transition from apartheid to democracy. And so I think this is maybe an important point, because what is spoken about as truth or in absolute revealed itself as being like totally corrupt.
Yes.
Just conceptually. And even the truths that we were presented with by the news regime, you then go, hang on, like, you guys should just take it a bit easy. Because now you're just doing this complete crossover. Where's the critical aspect of it?
Yeah.
So I think that was. I think there's a really strong generation of designers that came from that period who just questioned things more, or at the time just questioned things more, which I think is a good start, as an architect. And then, also you might like this, like manifesting. So this was a drawing really done to manifest this project we wanted to build for ourselves, which
Oh,
was a
fantastic.
home and an office. And it says somewhere in the garage, it says, double garage workshop where models are made which end up in MoMA. So I kid you not, we actually, this is a good lesson, and you've got to be specific which MoMA. Because this is a MoMA in Denmark, not in New York. So there's a model in the corner there.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, I think as architects we manifest stuff, right? Because we have to visualize things, and yeah. And this became quite a political project because the museum just wanted photographs of the completed architecture to add to quite a massive show with lots and lots of amazing architects, artists in it that dealt with Africa as the continent. And I think I could be wrong, but they were sort of missing a housing project.
Mm.
And so you can see the big photo on the right shows how, our project in the foreground, and the background is the apartheid settlement, and how these things don't differ very much when you zoom out. And so I was very reluctant to just give them photographs, and I wanted to tell a story about how people are living in those houses and how their actions reveal the shortcomings of this type of environment, which is simply a continuation of an old system.
Yeah.
And so I started doing these. So our team basically interviewed people, took photos what they were doing in the houses, and then I started mapping that out and drawing it with this complete dedication. Like every cornstalk that this lady is, laying out in front of her house to dry the maize kernels, to then ground them into flour, to then sell that, which is insane if you think that that's what you got to do to survive.
Gosh.
Because maize meal is like the cheapest staple food you can buy in South Africa.
Yeah.
And so it becomes really like quite
like a biography.
Yeah, it becomes like passive-aggressive statement in the museum context,
Yeah.
Going like, oh, you guys can like look at the architecture, but why don't you look at what people do? And I think these type of environments totally benefit when they are overwritten by people's actions and just formed over. So there's a great study done on Cidade de Deus in Brazil, where the city of God was filmed. It was the ETH led by a guy called Rainer Hill. And they just mapped like what was built by people and what was given to people. This is completely amazing. The people have made that city.
It's quite like that famous drawing of the walled city in Kowloon as well. That long section where it's got the intense activity of everybody and how kind of you start to get a sense of the intensity of it and the sort of the busyness of it and the how the place is just teeming with life that which you can't do unless you're going into that detail of you're documenting the activity of people.
Yeah, what you're saying is so vital, because if you look at this drawing, you can see this little like curvy line, which is a garden hose. And that is the daughter of the household who's running a car wash. This is like a big thing in South Africa. Like you want to have a clean car because it's your status symbol. Like really, it needs to be clean, properly clean. So car washes are a really great business. And so with the income from the car wash, this family is actually constructing this bigger building in the back, which are a bunch of rental rooms, and they're doing it, incrementally over there. And I think this is something that is actually really misunderstood in terms of settlement planning, in the sense that the services need to actually cater for, in the end, for at least double, if not triple, the occupancy of what you're designing it for. And so this is actually an illegal building. Like, Court of Joburg, I would venture even more, is built just
Yeah.
illegal because, for various reasons.
So these drawings really give us a kind of a reality into how space is genuinely going to be used and appropriated and adapted and come to life. And it's,
you can see this is a really lovely one. So the front is all like perfectly manicured lawn with rose bushes, and the back is like a complete mess where the patriarch of this household actually upholsters furniture. And this is where he runs his business, you know. Home is not home where you go after work. You just like, it's all there, man. It's like working, living, everything together. But I have this beautiful photograph of him sitting on a plastic chair on his lawn, just looking into the street, surrounded by his roses. And then at the back, it's him just working in this, it looks like trash, really. The debris of his occupation. Yeah. But perhaps this is quite a nice one to zoom in on, which was an exhibition we did last year, I think, at the university, Wits University, and this is really the culmination of, like, for me, my current obsession with drawing, and was really just, I started at one point and just filled this whole glass screen to the gallery. It started with the title of the talk, which Latitude is what we named after, Latitude of Johannesburg. And it went into, sections, kids kicking balls in streets, that idea of multiple narratives over tea, very important. Like things that have inspired me, like Harmony Korine, like films there's a couple of films out of Patagonia, Argentina, and also Chloe Zhao has done these two beautiful movies with non-actors, really, like the ultimate Western with First Nation people portraying themselves in a film about the Dakota Badlands. So I love this, where reality is just drawn out, very beautifully. And she made friends with the character that stars in The Rider, who fell off his horse, and he was a really ambitious and very good rodeo rider. And the film opens with his cracked skull with staples along the crack, and she just filmed how he came to terms with it, and it is so touching.
Oh, and where was this exhibition? This was at the university.
Yeah, so this was the genesis of it was actually, so we were asked to do 20 posters for Columbia University in New York by Professor Juan Herreros, who he chose us because we were unknown. He said, I'm gathering people from around the globe to come to New York to show us new things that we don't know because you guys are totally unknown. And so we ended up in New York. We had to do the exhibition, and then we were asked to reload it for the gallery space in Johannesburg. It was quite fun. This is an amazing one. It's not even really my drawing, but what you see here is this little box, right? With the door. And then you see these three people sitting. This was a project done by, like, not such a very confident student, and we were doing an analysis of an informal settlement, or mainly informal, Alexandra Township. And she really didn't know what to do, and she came across this tailor shop. So this is the tailor.
Yep.
And it's very much like Pet Architecture. I don't know if you know that book by Atelier Bow Wow.
Yep.
It's such a lovely book. And so he's made this in brick to protect his asset, which is a sewing machine. But then he built this really gorgeous veranda for his customers, so they sheltered. But this is like total micro architecture. And guess what he spent money on constructing this? It was really interesting. It was the tool rental from a neighbor. So he hired a wheelbarrow and he hired a couple of power tools.
Wow.
And the rest is 100% recycled.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, so it's such a powerful idea. And if I think in our context where we work, I think we need to, as architects, maybe recalibrate or let people calibrate the spaces. Or I don't even know if there's a space for architects in this. Although maybe there is, because I can just quickly show you this last thing. Hang on. I haven't updated this on the website, unfortunately. Can you see the website?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so this is a project we did in that same area where I showed you the sewage. And we had to really upgrade the edge of a taxi rank, which is a big taxi station with minibus vans that transport people to where they need to go. And there were existing traders, like really great. You know, this guy was making shoes. Like beautiful shoes, you know, there's no tourists nearby. This is like for people. Unbelievable shoes made out of like game skin and tires, disused tires. And so they needed a place to go. And so we got really inspired by what was already there. You know, this sort of tilt up shop for glazing. And this lady had a restaurant that she built for the taxi drivers. And it's just a roof. And so what we ended up doing was making that roof like a very big veranda. And so this part of it can be freely occupied. It's actually at the bus stop. And then it gets more formal as you go towards the main entry points. And then you have lockable stalls. So that's and you don't need a lot of space, and as long as you can lock up your stuff. So that's maybe from that observation of the tailor that becomes part of your thinking subconsciously. I'm only making the connection now. I'm talking to you.
So these are storage facilities and
they're actually shops. So
shops.
I wish I could show you them. So Ivan Baan came to photograph this, and I asked him please not to publish them, but he had to pay for his, trip. And so they were published without it being in operation. But just to be fair, and I need to quickly find an image of.
Can we see an image? Can we see the image of the sort of the roof, the canopy?
You mean this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really the back of the toilet block, which was an existing toilet block, and it was again leaking. And so we thought it would be really cool to just have this, because you have a wonderful view from here over the settlement. And this is the main entrance into the settlement. And it would be really nice to just do something special that offers sort of unprogrammed, non-commercial space. And actually, these guys are some of the taxi drivers having a meeting. So it becomes quite a popular hangout. It's not always occupied by big groups, but usually 1 or 2, 3 people come here. And this is where you arrive in Diepsloot, Diepsloot is a settlement and where you meet. So, yeah.
Brilliant. What a fabulous project.
Yeah, I'll email you some images of it occupied, because it's really quite beautiful. And those like rocket-looking things at the back are actually chimneys, because we don't have secure electricity supply. And places like this are hit much harder when it comes to load shedding.
Right.
And so even if you have a pay-as-you-go meter to buy electricity to cook, because this rank really operates at starts operating at 4:30 in the morning, then it's really pumping because people have to travel such huge distances to get to where they find employment or schooling or services. We thought, well, we got to like do this quite medieval thing and allow for fires in the building. So that was like a big problem for the authorities. But that is really the scenario,
Wow, what absolutely extraordinary project.
This is where they cook. And so we were replacing that, and we thought, well, if we're going to do a fancy new project, people should still be able to make a fire and not ruin the building or be told, stop cooking, is not allowed. So we actually made the fireplaces inside the stores. And then there's a whole informal economy of big companies, like, I don't know how it really works, but like once you've used pallets, often in the food industry, you have to discard them.
Yeah.
So there's this constant flow of pallets that get chopped up and processed into like little carryable bundles of fuel. And 75% of the people in the settlement of 200,000 people exist off the grid. So it's sort of normal to just cook on a fire.
Yeah. So there need to be provisions for that.
Yeah. And another thing we totally didn't expect was that by making the ablution block so accessible, so this is the main entrance, there's a big sliding gate that slides behind this brick wall. But opposite the taxi rank is very informal setup, little neighborhood, and they don't have any ablutions. Well, they have maybe some. You can see there's a vent pipe sticking out, so they're kind of pit latrines, and if the older they are, the more smelly they are, and problematic. So with the new ablution block, this actually became, in hindsight, quite nice because residents could then go and use that facility, which is a bit more generous.
Got it. So there is a kind of like an active relationship between what's been built, the new, and the sort of the informal settlements that are.
Yeah. I do. If you bear with me for a tiny bit.
Yes. Yeah.
It's slow. I would like to show you the occupied shops because they're really marvelous. And as soon as people actually could lock up their goods, the businesses started changing. So now you can buy IT, phones, airtime. There's actually a laundry, which I think is super nice because if you have the money to travel in and out because you've got a job, you're likely to have a bit of cash and you could drop off your laundry and pick it up a few days later, perfectly starched and folded.
Oh, brilliant.
This is sort of the beauty that you find, in a context with limited means. It is like absolute higher level creativity. And it's kind of our unattainable, El Dorado we strive for. Yeah. So those are the traders, some of them. There were 24 traders. And you can see there behind the fridge is the fireplace. There's really just a hole in the wall, a chimney on top. And I think this is, that's it being busy in the mornings, like really, really early. I think I went there at 4:30. And that's the laundry. It's like top loader washing machines. It's like a thriving business.
Brilliant.
And it's tiny. It's like 2 by 2 meters. And this kind of, in downtown Johannesburg, these type of retail spaces pay higher square meter rentals than prime office space in the wealthiest area of Johannesburg.
Wow.
I think the benefit, it's a lot of traffic because as soon as you are in these nodes that people have to pass through, you can trade.
And how does it work? The occupiers, they rent the spaces out from the local authority or the local?
So in this case, we were very adamant that there should be no rental charge because people didn't pay rent initially. and it would be unfair to displace them.
Right.
And we had a community liaison officer who actually workshopped this with the management agency who managed the rank, as well as the Traders Association. So as far as I know, the only thing they should be paying for is electricity.
Right.
And if they don't have electricity, they can, she won't be able to make a fire to wash clothes, but at least the food providers would have fire. But the other thing worth mentioning is, that we designed the plinths of the chimneys at the back. That is really heavy concrete pylons, total over design, but that was because we were hoping to, and now I can draw very wiggly, to actually put billboards in between here, which would pay about, well, they would pay about 40 grand a month. So 40 grand, you're going to divide that by 20, but it's a good chunk of your operating budget. In fact, it would pay for like a manager's salary plus cleaners. And just like a little bit further over here is the most disgusting, massive beer billboard. And alcoholism is just a massive problem in South Africa. That's why I think it was clever to, in the lockdown, to ban alcohol sales. This was beer. And you could actually get like a corporate to sponsor this and give them the naming rights, so they could say this is the MTN Diepsloot rank, or MTN node or Neotel node, and you could do specific artwork and messaging related to that context instead of this generic thing.
Yeah.
But actually the billboard sizes were generic, so these can come out of a massive plotter. So that, and this is the irony and the irritating thing about working here, is that the agency who manages the rank as a public entity has to tender out the works competitively, publicly. And they messed up their call for interest, just for expressions of interest, twice in a row, because it didn't follow due process.
Right. Gosh. Gosh.
So that's just the reality, we kind of deal with every now and again.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Thorsten. That's a really extraordinary project, and it gives us a real oversight into your working processes and the relationship between drawing and the manifestation of a project. So I think that's the perfect place to conclude with that. And I just want to say a massive thank you for that inspirational contribution. It's been brilliant.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Brilliant.